Okay, thanks for joining this video. This is things that you need to know and questions you should ask your customer. So, throughput or conveyor speed. Occasionally I get people phone me up and they tell me how many units they're making a day, which is of course very important for the customer, but really what we want to know is how fast they're moving at past our scanner. So throughput is not the same as conveyor speed. So what you need to do if your customer does not know the conveyor speed, you ask him the throughput and check the gap between the items, measure the size of the largest items and check the smallest ones so you can calculate. So for example, a carton size of 1 meter with a 1 meter gap, throughput would be 1800 units an hour, beg your pardon. And a 1 meter by 1 meter mark space ratio, you multiply that by the throughput per hour, that tells you the distance. So that shows you now in meters per hour what we're doing. Or work it out in meters per minute and then calculate down to meters per second. A few magic numbers that you need to learn. Just remember cos 45, I'll explain that in a second. And a few things that are useful to remember, that 60 meters per minute is obviously 1 meter per second, but 1 meter per second is 1000 millimeters per millisecond. I know it sounds obvious, but the scan frequency of our scanners is often 1000 hertz. So if you're running at 1 meter per second, so if the conveyor speed is doing 1 meter per second, the box will travel 1 millimeter for every scan our barcode scanner takes, if it's scanning at 1000 hertz. If it's scanning at 500 hertz, the box will travel 2 millimeters every scan. So you can use that just as a rule of thumb to work out how many scans you're going to get of a barcode and the speed that the box is traveling at. So for example, if you had a 30 millisecond delay on your trigger into the scanner and the conveyor is going at 1 meter per second, that's 30 millimeters movement before that trigger even gets into the code reader to read the code. Okay, hopefully you've remembered cos 45 is 1.414. You can just remember 1.5 truthfully, just as a rule of thumb. So if you imagine you've got an application here where you're reading a barcode on the front of the box, the scan height above the conveyor is going to be the height of the carton plus a bit so that the carton doesn't bump into the scanner. And we'll know that height there. We know we want to be at 45 degrees, but what we need to know is what that distance is there from the scanner to the furthest distance if the barcode is going to appear at the very bottom of the box. And because we know our trig and we remember cos 45 is 1.414, we work out that height there multiplied by 1.414 and that tells me my maximum distance. If we've got a box moving along the conveyor now, it's a ladder code on the side of the carton. The barcode is 5 millimeters in bar height, that's the distance of each stripe. We're going at 1 meter per second, scan frequency is 1 kilohertz. Have a think and see how many scans in theory are possible. Okay, jolly good, you've hopefully worked that out now, it shouldn't be rocket science. You're quite right, it's 5. But one of the problems is the first and last scan might not be valid, because can you see the effect of the movement? If it's doing 1 or 2 meters a second, there's a slight angle on the scan. And it might be it starts scanning at this point and scans through the code, halfway through, for example. So you might get partial scans. So we normally say if there was only 5, we'd have 3 that we'd be sure of. And we engineer our systems to have 10 scans for a better long-term performance. Our competitors actually set their scanners up normally to go for 1 scan before sending the data out. By default, our scanners are set for 3 scans. So that means that this application here, we would need to adjust to reduce the number of scans, because 3 scans isn't really enough to give a reliable performance on this 5 millimeter code. Or we would preferably ask the customer to increase the bar height, then we get more scans through it. Another critical, and probably the most critical thing, is that the cell size and X dimension are correct. So the light spot has got to match the bar width. You can see down here, nice small light spot, There won't be any overlap when it goes through the code. It will get a good clean signal from the dark bars and the white spaces. However, this one here is far too large, and it's going to get a reflection back as soon as it moves a little bit to the right, and it won't give a good signal. It's out of focus and won't read the codes well. So you can see two different devices with different reading ranges according to the cell size, the X dimension, and different ends of the price spectrum. So it's very important you identify clearly the cell size. And a problem you might encompass is that customers with the best will in the world will have been told the cell size, they won't necessarily know it. So they could be wrong. In fact, from my own experience, 90% of the time it's incorrect. So we always must measure it. And there's a very simple way to do that. And you do that by using this site, codecalc.weebly.com. You can see how it's done here in this animation just to the right. Or you can go through onto the Android app if you've got that one downloaded. The 2D code down at the bottom will take you through to it. So this is showing you in the animation. Click on the code type once you've identified it. Scroll down, put in the information, that's the measurement of your code beginning to end. Count the number of dark bars and click calculate, and it'll tell you the cell size. It's very easy. Next important thing is to make sure we speak the same language. So when we look at codes, we describe this one as picket fence, this one as ladder, and when they're higgledy-piggledy, they're omnidirectional. Some people call this omnidirectional if it's either picket fence or ladder, and that's incorrect. You should describe that as either picket fence or ladder because it requires a different form of reading system. Okay, so let's go on to the different types of readers. So one common question is whether we should use a laser reader or a matrix camera. And as a rule of thumb, you should use the CLV for linear codes, ladder and picket fence codes where the contrast is good and where you want a large depth of field. If, however, you want to read a data matrix code or a low contrast code like this one, or a poor aspect ratio code like these, in fact this one on the right here is a poor aspect ratio and low contrast. If you want to read and you'd only need a short depth of field, you notice here this is from our matrix reader. Depth of field is going from 200 millimeters out to 500, but it's going out on a very large code, on a 1 mil cell size. That's quite a big chunky code. And as the cell size gets smaller, you notice this one here, for example, with this cell size, which is 0.25 millimeters, the depth of field is actually very small, 30-40 millimeters. Or if you need to read omnidirectional, but once again remember the depth of field. So matrix scanners are very good for low contrast, obviously essential for a 2D code, but low contrast, poor aspect ratio, and okay if you only need a short depth of field, and if you want your code to be omnidirectional. Okay, types of readers to read this code, which hopefully you remember is the ladder code, and we use a line scanner for this type. This one here is a raster scanner, and nowadays we don't use very many raster scanners. Truthfully, the best way to read a code in picket fence is to use a line scanner like this, and as the code goes through, the line effectively sweeps up through the code. Or, if the code height is too varied, you can use an oscillating mirror, and you can see here that the scan line sweeps up and down, and it'll effectively produce the same sort of pattern as a raster, same sort of pattern as a raster, but the advantage is it covers a larger sweep height. These are reading orientations, and you'll see these diagrams also on the Weebly website, and you can copy them and use them if you want to paste them through into presentations. But this is front ladder reading, so the barcode's on the front, it's in ladder format. This is side ladder reading, top ladder reading. Hopefully this all makes sense. So to read these, you would use a line scanner. This one uses a line scanner, and so does this one. Here's a front picket fence code, and this is where people get confused. You don't always have to use a picket fence, a line scanner, sorry, an oscillating mirror scanner to read a picket fence code. Because as the box goes forwards, the laser effectively sweeps up through the code, so it scans the whole code for us. However, on the side for picket fence, we would use an oscillating mirror if the speed is less than 1 meter per second, for example, or an angled scanner using the smart in the scanner to decode it. Or top in picket fence, if the carton's going to have the barcode anywhere over it, then naturally we'd use an oscillating mirror. If it was in a very fixed position, we'd have a system like this one here with an angled line scanner. Critical thing to remember once again is the angle of the laser onto the code, always 10 to 15 degrees. This scanner here, with this sloped exit window, already has the 105 degrees or 15 degrees added into it. So what's very important also is to ask the customer what sort of performance they need. For example, when you're shopping at Sainsbury's, if occasionally an item doesn't scan, it's no big thing for you, you just represent it and scan it again. However, on a conveyor, when something's moving at 2 meters a second and it doesn't scan, and there's another one after it, another one after it, and so on, that's a big problem to your customer. So we really need to find out what is important, what the read rate is like, how many units they've got going through, i.e. what's the throughput. How are the no reads processed? Is it manual or automatic? And how many per day can they manage? It might be they only need to read 100 codes a day. So if they had a 99% read rate, they'd be very happy. One no read a day and the guy just then represents it. But if they've got 1,000 or 20,000 items going through a day, a 99% read rate would be catastrophic to their business. So every no read has a cost, and it's important to try and get some feel for that cost. So how much does it cost to process it? How much time does it waste if the item doesn't get onto the delivery because it was a no read and got held up? And therefore the customer can decide whether he really needs one of our performance items or whether he can go with an entry-level device. So useful thing and vital thing for the customer is his no read cost per item and per day. And then you can make a decision on which type of scanner to go for, whether you go for the entry level, the smaller scanner, or whether you need to go for the performance type of scanner. So just to give you an idea of typical reasons why there might be a difference. So here is some error in the code, deliberately put in, but you can see the difference between the different types of scanners. Our older series scanner, which couldn't read it at all. Our new series scanner, the CLV621, which is actually an entry-level scanner, where it got only 70 no reads, or the CLV630, which was pretty good, it still got 63 reads. So for faults like that, the CLV620, which is the entry level, or the 630, which is the performance scanner, both worked as well. Not a massive difference, but for some people that could be important. However, it's more telling when you come to a badly damaged code or even a badly presented code. And now once again you can see the amount of no reads we got here. From our old type of scanner it wouldn't read this, but for the new range, the CLV621, we got 500 no reads nearly, whereas and that's the entry level scanner, whereas the performance level scanner, the 630, which is the lowest of our performance level scanners, only got 62 no reads. So you can clearly see the difference between performance scanners and entry level scanners. This short video here will just show you what the CLV650 can do. You can see the angles it reads the code at.
What you need to look at is the graph here and the angle the scanner is on the barcode down here. See it's still reading. Look at the angle of the scanner on the barcode.
And then here is another video just showing the effect of distance. And at this point now what you're seeing, this red line here is the Ethernet output from the scanner, from the CLV, showing where the focus position is. You see as the scanner goes further out, the focus position extends, and we're still getting 100% read rate. You see how the scanner's tracking the position of the barcode and the focus position. even at very acute angles. You notice even the shape of the scan line as it goes over the code, it's not even straight. Both these videos are available on YouTube as well, so you can have a look on the Lector 620 channel on YouTube. Okay, so this is showing you a few of the charts, showing you the read range. So the entry level, the CLV620, we have a short range device, or I call that the high density. Can you see it works from maybe 50 millimeters out to 200, but particularly it works with a 0.15 mil cell size, and it'll work from 100 to 150. So you only got a 50 millimeter depth of field. That's the high density. Or we've got the CLV620 standard or mid-range, whichever you'd like to call it. Once again, the cell size is here. It goes down to 0.2, but it'll read a low density or relatively high density code. And then the CLV621, which is the longer range entry level scanner, which still goes out in a 1 mil code out to 700 millimeters. But now you notice it's optimized for 0.3, 0.5 or 1 mil. You have to consider the read height and the depth of field. So for example, if you've got a 0.35 mil minimum bar and you want a read height of 400 mil, so the barcode is 0.35 millimeters, and we need to have the read height here 400 millimeters because the carton's just above 400 mil and the barcode could be anywhere. And then looking from above in plan view, you can see the maximum distance from the scanner through to the furthest barcode when there's a small barcode coming down on a small box with a barcode on the further side of the conveyor. And then the larger box could come close up, which gives us our depth of field. So we need a depth of field of 300 millimeters, not a great deal, and a maximum distance of 700 millimeters. Well, we noticed just a moment ago the entry level will do 700 mil on a 1 millimeter code, but of course we've now got, don't forget, a 0.35 millimeter code. So if we look at the CLV630 and a 0.35 millimeter code, you notice the read height of 400 millimeters, that's the height to cover that height difference between the two codes. We've got to get out to about 400 before we get the plus or minus 200, giving us a total 400 read height up and down there. And when we start at 400 with a 0.35 mil code, we lose it. Can you see? Because the reading chart's gone in. So we can't read out as far as 700 with a 0.35 millimeter code. So it's important to check the read height and the depth of field that your application needs. You can see here the scanner that would really do it is the CLV650. Obviously autofocus helps too, but now with a 0.35 mil we can go out to 1 meter, and once again starting from 400 millimeters, no problems with the read height. And you can see the zones that we're wanting to read. With a 0.35, this one is well covering it, and this one is falling short. So once again, performance levels, 630, we do the 630 here, you can see the 0.35, 0.5 or 1 millimeter. We also do a 632, which is a high density scanner, and a 631, which is actually a close range, just so that if you want to mount the scanner on the side of a conveyor and the box is coming in close to the edge, it's not going to mean that the scanner is sticking right out into the walkway and causing a nuisance. And then we do another version of the CLV630, that's called the CLV640. And that one has a dynamic focus control. That means you can change the focus inside the unit. It's not autofocus. It means that you can set it up to have different focus positions, or you can adapt the focus, which gives a bit of versatility. So it's just a stopgap between the CLV630 and the CLV650. And now you see the ultra performance, for example, the CLV650 and the CLV690. So the CLV650 will work from 200 millimeters out to 1.5 meters on a 0.5 mil code. Similarly, the CLV690 works at over to a much longer range, and with a wider reading field. It actually has a 1200 millimeter reading field, or read height I should say. Okay, well, since most scanners scan at 800 to 1000 Hertz, conveyor speed is not such an issue for ladder codes. You can see the diagram here. I'm showing the number of scans that you would get if it was going through at 1 meter per second, or if you double the speed you'll get half the number of scans. So that's effectively how many scans would go through the code. So it's good practice to check the bar height. So for example, a 1 meter per second at 1000 Hertz, a 10 millimeter code gives 10 scans. If you're doing 2 meters a second, you're going to get 5 scans. So, thank you very much, and I hope that was informative and useful for you. Did you spot the deliberate mistake? Yes, that's right. It should have been 1 millimeter per millisecond. This tutorial will tell you how to change the firmware and the CLV6 series scanner using a micro SD card. Please be sure